Creepy and Geeky. Welcome to Creepy and Geeky. I'm your host, Robert, and today we're continuing our look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe, otherwise known as the MCU. On today's episode, Cat Voleur returns to talk all about Iron Man 2. Cat is the co-host of Slasher Radio and a writer whose debut book, Revenge Arc, is available for pre-order now and will be released in August. Welcome back to the show, Cat.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, always good to have you on.
Hopping over to the geeky side for a change.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's nice that so many people who've been on the creepy side are coming over to the geeky side. So hopefully that means some of the audience will as well.
I hope so.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So we are talking about Iron Man 2, which, is a movie. Um
That's
no,
how I would
I
describe it, a movie.
yeah. I we'll get deeper into it, but my feelings are that it's okay. It's early MCU, so they were still kind of finding their footing and figuring out what they were doing. It doesn't, it's not terrible by any means. I think that there's a lot of good in it. And we'll get to it. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
So
I
um
also I think
go ahead.
it's okay. I have an interesting history, I guess, back and forth with this one,
All right.
because it's ranked kind of all over my as the MCU has expanded, the
Right.
placement of this one has kind of shifted, and I think it's really interesting. Because a lot of and I'm not here. I'm not going to bash the MCU. I like the MCU for the most part. But I will say it's very interesting because for a while this was like dead last in my rankings.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, and I think it's really interesting that even though I've gotten more fond of the movie in comparison to, the MCU rankings, like where it stands, I, a lot of the issues that I have with this are issues I think they're very indicative of issues that I would grow to have later with the MCU.
Okay.
Um, So yeah, that's it. It was an interesting rewatch because I hadn't seen this one for a while.
Right. Yeah, I I don't think I think I'd watched part of it recently, but not the whole thing. I was kind of bouncing around. I like the MCU movies tend to be my go to bed movies. So
Yeah.
it's just because they're, I know what to expect out of them. I've seen most of them so many times that I can easily fall asleep to them. And so it's I I don't for me, I don't have as large a problem with the MCU as maybe a lot of people do.
Yeah.
For me, Marvel comic books has been a huge thing for me my whole life. I've always been a big Marvel fan on the comic side of things. And then once they started doing the MCU, once Iron Man came out and they started connecting everything, it just was like game on for me. So, because I was just super excited about it. And to finally see them attempt to do something in the way that the comic books have had, where you get all these crossovers and all that. So it was nice. And when looking at this one in particular, this is still building. Like, this first phase is all about building up to the Avengers and building up to the greater MCU as a whole.
Right.
So it's sure, we get the introduction of Black Widow, who becomes a pretty big presence from here on out. But it's it's not it's definitely not as crossovery as things get later.
Right.
So
Uh Yeah, it's not. I will say I do think this it's not my least favorite Black Widow appearance, but it was
Okay.
not a great start for her as a character. And I don't even think that's her. I don't even think it's the movie's fault. I think that Phase One MCU, like you said, they're still kind of trying to find their footing. You know,
Yeah.
like they've gotten so outrageously massive at this point that we forget that there was a time, Phase One, where this was like still new ground. You know,
Yeah.
they weren't guaranteed all these movies. They didn't have, you know, the like outrageous, ungodly budget for each
Right.
individual one of these movies that they have now. You know, like they were still big productions, but they weren't as ingrained into society. So like I don't think that the movie, you know, because who knew when Iron Man 2 came out, the conglomerate that this was going to end up being, you know, this is
Right.
just
Yeah.
such an every it's such a part of everyday life now. But so I think with Black Widows, it's one of the things that I've held kind of against this movie for a long time because I do really like Black Widow. And I always kind of felt like her introduction was cheated a little bit, being kind of like a subplot of Iron Man
Right.
2. But I don't think it's Iron Man 2's fault. You know, I think they were just kind of trying to dip their toes into that crossover territory in
Right.
a more aggressive way than we had seen in the first couple of installations, and I think it got everyone where they needed to be, even if it was not the strongest Black Widow start.
Right. Well, what's interesting though, and as much as it, like, I agree with you that, it's I really don't think the MCU found its footing until after, like, let's say, Captain America Winter Soldier.
Hmm.
Um once that one kind of solidified things a little bit better for them, and they seemed to finally start figuring things out. I mean, but again, I still think they're trying to figure things out. I think, that's what's
Yeah.
been interesting about Marvel for me, has been that, as it's gone along, they try different things. They try some stuff that might not work. They're just throwing things out there. And I think that's what's interesting about it, is that while while they're always building towards something bigger, they are also just trying to tell the individual story. And I think, don't get me wrong, there are definitely movies where they're kind of, where they fumbled that, and they tried to tell a little too much, to like lay too many plot lines down to for the future. And Age of Ultron is the biggest, most
Age of
egregious one of that
Ultron.
one. It's just it's
Yeah.
it's it's trying to set up too many plot lines for future things. And I think after that they realized and said, okay, let's pull back a little bit. And I
I
think,
think it's really interesting that you say that y- you that Winter Soldier was the one where you feel like they start to find their footing. And I agree. I think one of I you said that you didn't have as many issues with the MCU as a lot of people do.
yeah,
I'm the people that you're referring to because I do, as it's I was all in, like a thousand
yeah,
percent in on MCU from Iron Man. I was there. I was, you know, I was so obsessed. And I think we talked about this when we were discussing me coming on for
right.
Iron Man 2, that from this one forward, I've spent like two full phases at midnight releases. Like this was the first one, and moving forward, I was there opening night, you know, like in costume, ready to go. I loved MCU so much, and I do have a lot of issues with it, but one of the things that I do respect that the MCU is doing when they do it is that a lot of these movies, you know, they do take risks and they are trying new things. They're still expanding, they're still trying to make it a little bit more like well-rounded,
Right.
which is something that they fumbled in the middle. But Winter Soldier specifically, I think it's really interesting, because that was where I stopped liking it. It wasn't like where I stopped watching, but it was where I started to feel the decline of my interest in the MCU.
Interesting.
And I
That's
think
early
one
on too.
reason, yeah, it was kind of early on. And it was because I didn't like Winter Soldier much. I had a lot of
Oh
issues with
wow.
it. And then and that was kind of where I started. The fans were getting like really excited about it, and I could feel that parting of ways where it's like I think what I'm looking for from the MCU is not the direction that the MCU is headed in. For like
Right.
popular interests. So that was kind of but it was a turning point, and it was because that was where they started to feel there was a period in the middle there where they started to feel more similar to one another. And one thing that I really liked
Yeah.
about Phase 1 MCU is that even though we had imperfect movies, they all felt so niche to like what they were trying to do. Like each one kind of
Right.
felt like a swing. And and it's something that watching back, cuz I the last time I saw Iron Man 2 was actually in I went to the midnight release party for Avengers. Actually, they showed all of the movies of Phase 1 in a marathon up until midnight where we got to see Avengers. So I actually saw Iron Man 2 the last time in that theatrical event. And I haven't, so I, Avengers, I don't know what year Avengers came out, but it's been that long since I've seen Iron Man 2. And because it was not my favorite, but rewatching it was really interesting because this does, even though I think it was the weakest Phase 1 entry, it has that endearing factor that I do think Marvel lost touch with somewhere along the way, where it's like even when the swings, even when they're misses, you know, you can tell that they were trying to do something.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't feel like this is the weakest of the first phase. I think that's Incredible Hulk, really.
Oh, I
But
well, yeah, okay. I I have a
but
tough time counting Incredible Hulk just because of the
no,
recast and the like
yeah.
timeline. And but you're correct. It is the Hulk.
But yeah, no, I mean, but besides that, I think that, I don't disagree with you about this one being fairly weak. This one's got a lot of weird stuff going on it. It's fairly kind of overstuffed too. Like there's
Yes.
so much going on, like you said, with Scarlet, with Black Widow's character being kind of shoehorned in there. Now, to be fair, so in the comic books, you tended to get stuff like this. Like, as a comic book reader, I like to always like pop in, comic book knowledge into these things because it's the movies kind of tend to have that. As a comic book reader myself, I notice these things. And so, when they did introduce a character in the comic books, it would be something kind of like this. It would be somebody on the sidelines, just some character they're trying out and seeing if it fits. And then, if the character's popular enough, they'll spin them off into something else, or they'll add them to the Avengers or whatever. So it does feel kind of like that in terms of just, being a comic book reader and watching that and feeling that they're adding her in like that.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, we've got, Tony's like, dying from this palladium sickness. We've got like he's already suffering problems. Um, and it's just weird.
Yeah. There's a lot going on. And I feel like they chose a lot of really interesting elements for Tony as a character that they didn't because there was so much other stuff going on that I think even the contradictions could have worked if it had been a tightly focused character story, and
Right.
we just
Yeah.
weren't at a phase in the MCU where we could have those. Like
Yeah.
a lot of people pick on Iron Man 3, which it has its problems also, but I
Yeah.
do like that they focused in on Tony, which is something that we see them try to do here, and it doesn't really
Right.
work because there's so much other stuff going on.
There's so much going on. I mean, not only that, but we got new actor as Rhodey, which is
Yeah,
like okay, which is great though because Don Cheadle
Don Cheadle is so good.
astronomically better than Terrence Howard. I've already expressed on the first episode about how much I was just like not like a big fan of Terrence Howard in the role. Um,
See, I didn't have a problem with Terrence Howard, but it's when I think of Rudy, I think of Don Cheadle. Like he does such a good job.
yeah, no, he's just so much better. Like I don't think Terrence Howard did a bad job. I just don't think he was great in the role, and I think that um Don Cheadle is so much better.
Yeah.
And then and then the like the major problem I have with this movie more than anything else is just the that Mickey Rourke is, while he's a good actor, this is not the greatest part for him in terms of the MCU and everything else. It just, I don't know, I just didn't like the character.
The character isn't well established, and it's so I again they tried to do so much, you know? I
Yeah, I don't get it. It's like it almost feels like they're like, okay, well, we don't know how much more we're going to be able to get through all this, because at the time they were still self-financing and still being distributed by Paramount.
yeah.
And so maybe that was kind of the feeling, like, let's just throw everything we can into this.
Mhm.
Um, so, but it's like, I think they were trying to kind of get away from the in a way, which they didn't totally get away from it, but I think they were trying to get away from and I discussed this in the earlier episode about the mirror. What Marvel has an issue with is the villain who's a dark mirror to the hero, basically somebody with
Yeah.
similar powers or whatever. And um they they just have this, like, they, I don't even know what I'm trying to say. But with Mickey Rourke, with Whiplash, they kind of went away from that, but kind of doubled down on it as well. And I was like, well, if you're gonna double down on it, why not bring in somebody like, I don't know, Crimson Dynamo or the Titanium Man? You could have brought in other armored characters who would have been much more interesting. Or if you were gonna do Whiplash, don't have him be in an armor, have him be something else. So it was just odd.
They had
So
options, and
they did, yeah,
they picked one that I I think was kind of regrettable. They also did
yeah,
a bad job. In Iron Man, I we have a clear, there are it's not even that we have clear villains in the way that we had seen antagonists for superheroes done up to that point, because usually it was like one versus one, and we don't have like the Iron Man for a superhero movie at that time had a lot of complexity in the narrative
yeah.
structure, which I really appreciated. Uh, so it, but there were still clear cut, like bad situations. Iron Man 2 it has a lot of like extra layers to it that didn't really need to be there, because uh Ivan Vanko, like, we kind of know who he is, we know he's against Iron Man. Like, we know basically what his backstory is, but it's nothing that you couldn't put down in like a one or two sentence summary, you
Right.
know? And then but we also have to, cuz it's we have to spend so much time talking about, like the people manipulating him, and then like Tony's inner demons, and the US government is also after him. And it's like it's not
And
a
Justin
clear cut.
Hammer, and yeah.
Yeah, Justin Hammer. There's not like a clear cut, this is the problem, I'm going to fix it. And even though that's a direction that, the MCU has kind of matured into, where there are bigger implications to things,
Right.
it needed to be done gradually, which eventually it was. But here we're just
Yeah.
kind of throwing all that into
Throwing
one movie.
everything
And
into it to all get resolved by the end, and where this would be more of like a multi, like this would have, like, this kind of storyline would have probably worked more on a TV show where you have these multiple layers of stories going on that could
yes.
be resolved at different moments. But with trying to shoehorn it all into one movie, you've got to resolve it all by the end, and everything's got to tie together in a way that may or may not work quite as well. So
And it made Whiplash really suffer as an antagonist
yeah.
also, because like you could have taken him out of the movie, and this more or less would have been the same plot, like,
Right, yeah,
which isn't
because you could have
great.
just had Justin Hammer figure out his thing, make them into drones, blah blah blah, and then
Yeah.
that would have been just as good without Ivan Vanko being involved at all. So
Which sucks because it's not Ivan Vanko's fault as a character, but we didn't need him because yeah,
Right.
Justin Hammer's already working on the tech. Like he already has most of the drone army done by the time Vanko enters the picture,
Yeah.
and it's like he does like all the final touches for this, but it's not it,
Yeah.
it was very lackluster.
Now on the good side, we did get, like I said, we did get Don Cheadle and we got War Machine in this one.
Yes.
So that was a huge plus. As a comic book reader, I was never that into War Machine, but in the movie, he's really good. I think it comes off a lot better than for me than it did in the comic books. Because in the comic books, I'm like, why do we need another armored dude? We already have Iron Man. So but in this instance, it makes a lot of sense. They've got to take down a huge army of drones. So it's it's I don't know. It's so funny too watching like these first two Iron Man movies and just seeing where Tony's status was like between the two, between like the first one, obviously he's famous, but by the time of Iron Man 2, there's been, the first Iron Man movie came out in 2008, the second one came out in 2010. And there's been this, gap, and, he's apparently been very prolific in maintaining peace through his Iron Man armor and everything. And, that causes consternation with the US government, or at least with, some specific people in the government who want to take his armor away from him.
Yeah.
And we find out why later in another movie. Uh, just why that one person is really out to get him. Um, but it's interesting because you see Tony at like an even higher like status than he was before. Um, and he does seem to be at this point the only true superhuman person, superhero type character that's around. And as the MCU grows and everything, and it's kind of remarked upon later on in Civil War, that since Tony became Iron Man, there's been this huge proliferation of powered people existing. And it's so interesting to find out that it's really since that 2008, since Iron Man appeared, that all this started happening. So
Yeah. And it's
very,
interesting that he's put on such like you said, he's higher status in this one.
yeah,
He's done a lot of good. He's in the headlines a lot more. He's being viewed very positively at the start of this movie, but it is interesting because like we were talking about, they just tried to juggle too many things because that's in such stark juxtaposition to the fact that he's like publicly kind of falling back on his own ways. Like the presentation he gives, it's very sleazy, it's very
oh
showy,
yeah,
like they make a lot
yeah,
of jokes about it. And they have like this whole kind of he's falling back into bad habits thing, but also they're trying to set up that concept of him as a character where he struggles with doing things for the greater good, which is something that we do see come back around in Avengers and, in Civil War, and it's something he
right,
struggles with in Iron Man 3. Like they set that arc up here, but they set it up so poorly because his
yeah,
it's still coming from a very selfish place, but it gets distracted. Like they muddied the water so much with how good he's doing. And I think that's a really interesting contrast because I think both of those are facets of his characters where he has this like self-destructive, obsessive, i- narcissistic attitude, but also he struggles with big things and wants to be a better person. Those are both facets of his character, but I
right.
think they were balanced so poorly in Iron Man 2.
Yeah, and again, I think it's them finding the character in that, because
Yeah.
mostly what you find in Iron Man 2 is that yes, he's being heroic, but it's from his own narcissism in a lot of ways. Like him going and basically, privatizing peace and, going around and, saving the world or whatever is not for the greater good, it's for his own ego.
Yeah.
And it's very much that way because, like you said, in his little sleazy speech at the beginning, it's all about him. He says,
Right.
"Oh, well, it's not about me. It's not about you. It's about legacy." Blah blah blah. And it's like, no, it's a little bit about you, Mister. So, but which is very Tony Stark, which again goes into just how good Robert Downey Jr. is at playing this character. That
Yeah.
somebody who comes from that kind of past that he had where he was regarded as one of the best young actors in the 80s and 90s before like the drugs just kind of overtook him, and his life fell apart there for a little bit, and the MCU kind of gave him that back, and so it's like it's interesting to see as like as his star rises in the MCU, like as the actor that he is, because Tony was arguably the main character of the first three phases.
Yes.
We start with the movie where it ends with I am Iron Man, and we end with the movie where he says I am Iron. And and then that's we see the struggles of the MCU to kind of find its footing to a degree. I think the MCU's been fine since Endgame. There's been hiccups, but there were hiccups all along.
Right.
So it's just I think that this movie is interesting because it's just Iron Man, the first Iron Man did so well, and so you see it's kind of like the MCU kind of telling on itself in a way, like yeah, we're good, we're awesome, we got to get knocked down a little bit, but we'll get back up. So it's an interesting, like you said, this first phase is real interesting because of everything that's going on in it, in terms of just the world building, and they struggle. I mean, each one of these, Iron Man, I think, hits it out of the park pretty. The first Iron Man movie, I think, hits it out of the park pretty well. There's not really anything in there that's too terrible that I can sit back and go, oh, if you took that out, whatever. But like, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, there's little bits that are kind of like, hiccupy in each one of those that could, get kind of better as you go along with the characters. Um, but I think, it's interesting that the first phase is kind of uneven.
Yeah. I think it's good, and it really is just so I know I keep saying endearing, but that is kind of like there's a charm in that first phase, where they're just trying to
Yeah.
figure it out, and they don't you can tell, I think especially Iron Man 2, you can tell that they did not have the faith that this was ever going to be as big as it is now.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because like Whiplash could have easily been a movie. Like that could have easily been its own Iron Man
Yeah.
movie. Um and it just you can tell that it was rushed, like they wanted to cram a bunch of stuff in here. Uh and it I if they had known, I think it could have been a lot smoother, but I also think it wouldn't have been quite as charming as it was as a phase of the
Yeah.
universe building.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean we get within just a just in the few short years we get the full Iron Man trilogy, and I mean obviously he continues on into the Avengers movies and into Civil War, and pops up in the Spider-Man movies and stuff like that. So they keep playing him out. He keeps guest starring and stuff, even though his trilogy is done. Um, and so it's interesting to see this character who started the MCU get to continue throughout it. And then even then, his legacy continues to be something that even now you see on, I'm recording this after the first episode of Secret Invasion has come out. And there's they're in Moscow and there's like art on the wall of Iron Man. So it's like, his legacy runs deep in the MCU, regardless of, where you know that he's not around anymore. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that his his character just looms large over it all.
Absolutely.
Um, but it's let's go back to Black Widow though. So because
Yeah.
her first appearance, it's she spends most of the time pretending to be an assistant to first Tony and then to Pepper,
Pepper.
and it's it's a little odd.
It's I think it's very odd. I think it's very frustrating, the way that she's handled. I don't wanna go off on, like, a whole, like, feminist MCU thing. Everyone's heard it, like, there's stuff online about it all the time. I will say,
Right.
in Phase 1, I do think the writing of women was a weakness, constantly, but I think, like, Iron Man when you look at Iron Man and Iron Man 2, I do think there was a decline in the quality of writing, of secondary characters overall and women in particular. This was also one of my least favorite movies for Pepper, who had already been established, and I think trying to bring Natasha in at this particular film, it set her back quite a bit. We do finally have the Black Widow movie, like, she does finally have an entry, but that was something that fans were, like, on about for a long time in the MCU because they made us wait for her,
Oh, it was
and
ridiculous.
I
And
can't
we
help
finally
but
got the
wonder if
movie
this
after
movie
she
didn't set us
dies.
back. Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I know. Oh,
I
and
mean,
it's because, like, she's a secondary character. Her introduction is just so she's, like, playing a triple secret agent or whatever, and they're
yeah.
like but she's doing and, Tony keeps saying, like, how impressed he is with her, but she's not doing a good job,
Yeah.
which she stands out so much. She has erratic mood swings. She's violent. She
Yeah.
shows her entire hand. She puts it on her resume. Like I have to wonder what they thought they were doing with Natasha in this one because
Well,
I don't think it
yeah.
came across.
No. And I think they, after that point, they kind of start to figure her out a little bit better. I think she's handled it a little bit better in the Avengers, and especially in stuff like not Civil War, in Winter Soldier, um,
Yeah.
which I know you have issues with, but it's but I think
Not with her though. It
her.
was mostly with Bucky. I didn't. Uh,
But yeah, it's an interesting, like, I think that as we go along with her, you get more and more, and see, so inherently, like, I didn't have a problem with her being a just a side character who popped up in Avengers stuff, because there are characters like that in the comic books who only exist as part of the Avengers, and they never get a title of their own. So you
right.
only get to see a character once in a while. And it's with um with Black Widow, her first appearance was in an Iron Man comic book. So it's very much on brand with the comic books in that way. So it wasn't like it was. I don't get me wrong. I wanted to see a movie with her, like, just have her with her own movie, but somebody like like Hawkeye, or somebody who's a side character who doesn't necessarily need, like, out of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Do we need a Rocket and Groot movie by itself? No, we don't need that. We just keep them as part of the movie. And so I think that that's interesting that we did finally get a movie, and it was a good movie. I like the Black Widow movie.
Yeah.
But I do feel like it that took too long because they had promised one so early on as well. So,
Right.
and that was different than just going, yeah, we're never going to give her a movie. So, but I don't know.
I also it's one of the issues, it's one of the bumps that I feel that they had is that the MCU doesn't always know when to do full arcs for people and they don't always
Yeah,
know like which characters need the attention.
right.
And one issue that cuz Black Widow, to my understanding, in my corner of the internet, it was not particularly well received. Not that it was bad, but like there was a very lackluster response to Black Widow, and I think part of that was just the timing because they
Yeah.
had teased it for so long, and she was a character that people were really interested to see more from at a specific time in the history of the MCU, and it.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of agree with you. I don't mind. I had a lot of issues with the way that her character was introduced like in execution, but I didn't mind her being a secondary character in an
Right.
Iron Man movie. Like I actually thought that was I I thought that was a good spot to bring her in at. It was just the way that
Yeah.
it was done that
Oh
was,
yeah.
and
No, no,
also
no.
because there was so much other stuff going on, it's like I don't know how well they could have feasibly done.
Right.
I
Yeah.
think they could have expanded on any one of these elements and it would have been a very strong arc, but, like, I honestly, they might have done the best that they could do with the time that they had for each of these individual plots, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. No, it's yeah, it's definitely weird having her in the movie. I mean, she gets a great scene towards the end. It's a really uh fun scene between with her and Happy, her
Yeah.
just kicking ass and him
He gets
thinking
so
he's all
excited
cool
because
because
he
he gets
got the one.
one guy done. She's like kicked 10 other guys down, and so it's such a great scene. But
It
you know,
is.
it yeah, with everything that the movie just feels so overstuffed. There's so
Yeah.
many things going on in it. There's like, you know, like I said, we're not even talking about like the whole Tony dying from the palladium poisoning, you know, him having to find a new unknown element to, you know, to cure him and everything. It's just like there's so much going on in this movie that you
And
draws focus away from the different other parts of it. So
And it makes, like there are a lot of emotional moments or highlights or, there are glimpses where you can tell, like, this should have been a really big deal on paper, but they don't have the impact because there was just so much stuff going on. I think a really good example of that is, Tony's dad.
yeah,
He sees the reel, and there's like this big emotional moment, where it's like the greatest thing I ever created was you. But it's not that emotional because the setup was
yeah,
so scattered in
yeah,
amongst everything else. Where
yeah. You just don't get that. Like, and I think that's kind of why they come back to it in in game. You know, so they like you know, so
and it
Tony can
works
have
in
this.
Endgame.
It works so much better in Endgame. Yeah. So you know, you get this new catharsis for him. You know, and it's just weird. There's so many things that like they lay down in these early movies that either you know, get picked up and done and picked up and done better later on, or they just you know just push aside and don't worry about it again. So and I mean, and that's fair. I mean, there's definitely things in these movies that I think are interesting that they kind of reference or go into that you know you think are going to be important and then they just kind of push it aside. And that, again, that's kind of like the comic books. You think something's going to be interesting, important, and then a new writer comes on and they're like, no, I'm not even going to pay attention to that, so we're not going to worry about that. So yeah, and it's very
Yeah.
much how these movies feel sometimes is like something comes along that'll contradict something that happened in the past and you just kind of have to roll with it. And I know that's not very fun for most moviegoers, especially people who like really dig the interconnectedness of it all and want them to uh to pick up on those threads and stuff, but it's just like, you know, sometimes they got to make adjustments because they're kind of like, you know, as much as they have a plan, they're still kind of making this up all along, like all along the way. So
Yeah. And
but
it's really
which to me is
interesting
fun.
because
Yeah, go ahead.
I do think it's a tone that we've seen kind of shift in the MCU,
Yeah.
which it makes sense because the internet has only gotten bigger, like nerd culture online has only gotten
Yeah.
more mainstream since all of this happened, but it has shifted the tone of the movies because I've noticed there are a lot more they go a lot more overboard with the Easter eggs. They spend a lot more time trying to explain how, the multiverse connects to each other, and these are fairly new, like too much time, arguably.
Yeah.
But like it's something that you can tell that society has kind of pressured the MCU to change and evolve to kind of coincide with. And again, it just comes back to one of my favorite things about Phase 1 of the MCU is that it does have that kind of comic book collaboration feel,
Yeah.
where they're winging it, and it's more about telling the story from where it's at and what they can manage than it is
Right.
about, pleasing fans online at a later date.
Right.
And I do kind of miss that when even with Iron Man 2, which I is not the strongest example of where it has worked. I think it's still nice to see. Um
I
and
think I go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, and just like for all of that, even with all the inconsistencies and like pacing issues, it's why Phase 1 still has, I think Iron Man 2 still ranks, like, it's still way up high in, yeah, the original Iron Man is way, way up high in my list of
Yeah, oh
rankings
yeah. Yeah.
still, because when they knew what they were doing and they focused on the stories, they were still knocking them out of the park, you know?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that I feel like they are still just trying to make things their way. Kevin Feige is a fan of the comic books, so he's the one guiding it all. I don't think he's doing stuff for the fans. I don't think he's trying to please the fans. I don't think he's trying to do anything. Don't get me wrong. I mean, obviously you want to please the fans. So maybe, doing little nods here and there, but I think overall he's just trying to tell the story he wants to tell. And I feel like he's got the firmest hand on everything, despite, whatever other writers or anything else. He's the one with the master plan going on, and he's the one who wants it to go his way. So it's I don't know. It's this I don't know. I feel like these movies are just they're still so fun. Even with this one, like I remember when this one came out, whatever issues I had with it, I was still just so jazzed to have something going on in this continuing saga of this interconnected movie universe. And so, it was just so much fun to, for another one to keep coming out and to get teased, because in this one we get the tease of Thor. And
Yeah.
that was monumental at that time. So, it was because the movies were spaced out so much more, and because we didn't get they weren't planned out as far ahead as they are now. Like now we know what all the movies are going to be, most of what the movies are going to be coming up for the next several years. But back then we were just like, okay, well, there's only so many movies we have planned, so here's what you're getting.
Do you
So
remember, like, I don't know if this is an experience that other fans had, but I remember seeing because I was at the same place. I was so excited that we were still getting these, and everyone felt great. It's like we're getting another one. It's still going, But I do remember seeing the decline in quality, specifically in Iron Man 2, and being a little bit worried where it's like, this isn't going to end, is it? Like, because it
yeah,
felt like less care had gone into it, and I was just I
I think
remember
I
being
kind of
worried
felt that
about
way
that at
with
one point.
Thor. Thor felt, and I'll get into it with the next one, but Thor, like kind of with this one, and then with Thor, I was kind of like, oh wow, they really need to get their shit on track. Like I love these movies, don't get me wrong, but they're a little uneven, and I hope they do well, and I hope they keep
Yeah.
going. So, and thankfully Disney bought them and was just like, okay, let's pump these out. So, good or bad, it's I
Good or
feel
bad.
like
Yeah, I think it's kind of a be careful what you wish for thing because like even though I wouldn't get rid of the MCU, no under no circumstances would I do that, but it does feel because I remember being back there in Phase 1 right around this time period in the MCU and thinking like I hope that they keep making them, and Disney buying them out feels I know that's why we're still getting them, but it does often feel like a curse, sometimes. Like a very much be careful what you ask for, because now I feel like it's like, oh, you get them, but you get them several times a year, all the time, and it's all you get, and it's like, oh, well, all right.
See, for me, that doesn't bother me. I like getting the multiple movies and the multiple TV series, but again, that's just because I'm such a hardcore Marvel nerd that, like, for me, it's even when they don't work, I like, I'll argue that there's some stuff that I just didn't care for, like Moon Knight. Um, I
Yeah.
still watched it and I enjoyed parts of it, but it wasn't my thing. And for other people, they really enjoyed Moon Knight. But there's things that I have that I like okay-ish. I'm kind of middle ground.
Mhm.
And there's, I would say that I would argue that for me, there hasn't been anything super terrible that the MCU that's been in the MCU yet. Stuff that there's definitely stuff that I don't watch that much, but there's I would argue that at least even when it's not great, it's still better than a lot of the other comic book movies that have come out um you know over the years. So just
I
you
would,
know be,
oh, I absolutely say that.
you agree with me is what you're saying?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Definitely, like, there's some stuff that I had MCU burnout for a while.
Yeah.
And I have my own issues with Disney on and off anyway, so it was like there was a realistic point for me to step back a little bit, but
Yeah.
I think even with the burnout, because it was one of those things where, like, early in, you could go in having never seen one of the MCU movies, and you could watch it and you'd be getting a decent comic book movie. And then there was a point, like, in phase 2 where it was I felt like I was being rewarded for having seen all of them. Like, I still felt like most of them could have been standalone movies, but they had, like, it felt more like a community and more like,
Right.
being a part of something, because I had been there since phase 1 and I was all caught up. And at some point, phase 4 was that point for me where I did feel pressured to watch all the things. And it's like, and when there were things that I wasn't as interested in, that were going on. Even like, because there was the whole thing that there was the whole confusion at the time with Agents of Shield and where it fit into the
Yeah.
canon. And it, but it was like I didn't enjoy Agents of Shield that much, so it was one of those like I just felt like I was like there was pressure to watch it anyway, because it's
Right.
like, how are they going to call it back, and then and it kept escalating, and phase 4 was where we got a lot more of the shows, which I
Right.
think overall I like less. But it was just one of those like and that was where I started to kind of like experience that. So there was a point where the MCU started to feel like uh, too much.
Bloated. Yeah.
Yeah, it felt loaded. But the thing about it is that I still think, even with the shows, even with the movies that I didn't like, even with all my MCU hot takes, I do still think Marvel has the best movies, like the best comic
Yeah.
book movies. I and it's hard because the very limited amount of comics that I had the opportunity to read as a kid,
Right.
uh because that was I liked comics as a kid, but I didn't have the access to them. It was one of
Okay.
those kind of rare things. And I so like I could never follow whole arcs and stuff. It was just like where I
Right.
could get my hands on comic books. And I always kind of preferred DC, but
Oh,
then
okay.
but when it started, so, and I think it's one reason why I got like so into the comic book movie craze, uh because it was a lot easier to watch a movie than it was to like collect a whole arc of comic books
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
it, so but when as I started feeling much more favorably toward Marvel when I switched to comic book movies instead of trying to collect actual comic books, because
Right.
the the DC movies have burned me quite a few times. So just like
Yeah.
to your point about the MCU having like some of the strongest movies and being like a class above, that was true from the very beginning. And even with the frustration I felt, that's still true today. Like,
Right. Well, I wanted to go back to something you said too, because you mentioned about how like you felt like you're kind of bogged down in the continuity now, the kind of where you feel like you
yeah.
have to watch everything. I still feel like they're doing enough in each individual movie and each individual series to explain enough that you don't need to go back and watch that stuff. I think that if you do, it enriches what you are watching. If you do decide to dive into all of it, yes,
Mhm.
you get a much broader experience. You get all the little new connections and stuff like that that you wouldn't get otherwise. But I don't think that anything is necessary. That I think that even if you watch something, that even with something like Infinity War and Endgame, if you watched both of those, because those were you know basically part one and part two, that if you just watched those without any of the other stuff that went into it, you would generally understand what was going on. You might not pick up on every little plot thread and everything, but you would still understand most of it. And then if you decided to go, okay, well, I'm interested now in some of that other stuff, I'll go back and check out some of that stuff. Then it would just kind of fill in some information that, you know, maybe you might have been slightly confused on, but I think that overall, I think that for the most part, and I'm coming at it from a perspective that I don't have because I have seen it all.
Yeah.
So, but from what I've heard from people who don't watch everything, that by and large they can understand most everything that's going on, and they can keep up with the plots and all that. So it's not
Well,
solely
that's good to
some,
hear.
yeah,
It is. It still was. I don't want to say that it had me in kind of like a hostage situation, but it it was a big fear that I had because I had uh like you up through phase 3 and well into phase 4, I had seen everything, and there was just
yeah,
this fear where it's like, am I quite going to be able to enjoy the ones that I still want to go see if I'm not
right,
entirely, because I it was just a perspective I didn't have. The
yeah.
only like point of reference I had was my dad, because so he doesn't like comic book movies, but he really likes going to the theater. And there were a few years in there where, if I dragged him, he would go watch a Marvel movie with me, and and he always seemed confused. But then it was like, is it because he hasn't seen all the MCU movies, or is it because he wasn't like paying attention? Because it's
Yeah,
a
because
comic
he's
book
just not
movie, and
into it.
he's
Yeah,
yeah, which sucks because I still maintain this. I think if he had not known that it was based off of a comic book, he would have really liked Guardians of the Galaxy, just because that's like
yeah,
such a, you
yeah.
know,
It's just
it,
an out there
and that
bonkers idea. Yeah,
and it felt really self-contained, the first
yeah,
one. But he was like, I don't know, it was a comic thing. It's like, all right, well,
yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've dipped much of your toe back into stuff lately and everything like that, but I would give that a try. Just kind of watch the things that you're sort of interested in first, before if you're not, especially if you're not interested in going back and rewatch and in watching everything that
and
you've missed.
filling it in.
Just pick and choose the things that you're most interested in and give that a shot and see how that works for you,
I
given
think that
that you
might be a
do have.
better way for
Yeah,
me to approach it. And I will say, because I just recently got the Disney Plus subscription back.
yeah,
So and the one that I've been really interested in since I quit has been Multiverse of Madness, because I'm a big Sam Raimi fan.
yes,
So
I
big
highly
Benedict
recommend that one.
Cumberbatch fan.
Yeah.
So
And I,
and I
eh, eh,
have been thinking about like just picking up with that one.
yeah. No, I highly recommend that one. I think that, there were a lot of people who complained that, oh, well, you have to watch WandaVision to understand what's going on. You don't. If
Okay.
you watch, if you watch WandaVision, great. It's a fun show. It definitely gives you the background, like a deeper background for what's going on with Scarlet Witch, but you don't need it to understand what's going on. They give you enough information in Doctor Strange to understand what's going on.
That's good.
So you'll have to watch it and let me know, because I'll
Yeah.
be interested to see your take on that, because you haven't seen WandaVision yet, right?
I have not seen WandaVision yet.
Yeah,
WandaVision,
so
I
I would
think, was right where I dropped out.
okay, yeah. So I would say, yeah, give that a try, see how that works for you, and then let me know. And then,
Yeah.
I'd be interested to hear the perspective of it. Because at least you've seen most of everything up until that point. And so you
Hmm.
kind of at least have somewhat of a background of what's going on. And then maybe you can just dip in and out when you want to. Like, and I feel like that's honestly a good way to go, even for somebody new to the MCU who's never seen anything. Just watch the
Yeah.
things you're interested in. You don't have to watch everything. It if you do watch it all, sure, it's great, it's fun, you get all the extra little things in the with all that. It's like for me, like with the Marvel comic books, there were only certain things that I read, and I would be missing references, like, oh, well, such and such happened in some other story. Well, yeah, so okay, so if I really want to know what happened in that, I can go watch that or I can go
Right.
read that story, but I don't have to, whatever's happening with Daredevil, it's like I can go read the Daredevil story, but if I'm not interested in Daredevil at the moment, I don't have to, so it's 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 I think the movies are trying to do that, and I think they've been trying to do it in that way. Sure, when you're leading up to a bigger story, yeah, it's nice if you hit certain bits here and there, but you don't have to. You can still just watch the big thing and then go fill in later if you really feel like you missed something.
Which is good. I feel like I do feel like that's how it is probably meant to be consumed. I and I taking a break from it, I'm hoping is going to allow me the freedom to start consuming it that way. It was just so hard
Yeah.
because it was like it
Oh
was
yeah.
so especially with Avengers, and again with Age of Ultron, and I guess again with Endgame. It was like there was that very satisfying feeling of like having the completionist
Yeah.
route of MCU where I just felt like I was in on everything, but it
Right.
became like after Disney bought it out and with the streaming services and everything, it just became a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I think if you just hit the things you're interested in, I think you'll find it more satisfying just for you because you'll just only get the things you really want to pay attention to, and you won't really have that sense of loss, like, oh, I have to watch everything. And you'll I truly believe that, as much as sure they want you to watch everything if you can, that's the great thing about it. You don't have to. You can just pick and choose. You can just enjoy it for what it is. And I know there's people who are interested in only certain characters. They're only interested in Doctor Strange, so they'll only watch whatever Doctor Strange is in. So it's interesting in that way that I know there are people who do that. And so it's always like, okay, well, that's a way to do it. And like whatever way works best for you, I think is always the best way of doing it, especially because don't get me wrong, I as much as I enjoy the movies, sure they can feel a little bit samey at times.
Yeah.
But it and especially when I think the problem is that when everybody else is out there doing them, like DC and all the other comic book movies and everything else that's going on, it's just it does feel like there's a lot and it's too much at times. So
Yeah.
because we just got
It's
the
tough.
Flash, and this was all like multiversal and everything, and it's just like, okay, but Marvel already just did that. So
Yeah, we'd like to see something else.
yeah, so yeah, it's. But going back to Iron Man 2, as much as Iron Man 2 is, it has issues. I still think it's an interesting and fun movie at times. There's a lot going on, good and bad. It sets up stuff. It you get some Sam Jackson as Nick Fury again, which is always a plus.
Mhm.
It's always interesting that he didn't get more play in the MCU. You would have figured
Yeah.
he would have popped up more often, or maybe even got a movie of his own. It's nice to see him getting this TV series with Secret Invasion now. So
Yeah. Um, and it is kind of strange how little he pops up because he feels like such a presence in
yeah.
it.
Well, and he's like, he's been there since the beginning. He was there in
Yeah.
Iron Man 1. So it's like, just as much as Tony was like, that's what's interesting is like, to me, it feels like instead of Tony being like the big character for the whole thing, it should have really been Nick Fury. but
It probably should have been.
they didn't do it that way. And so, and I get it, Robert Downey Jr., he's a presence, he's that guy, but
Yeah,
I feel like, Sam Jackson, he's still around, he's still doing it, and he's from what I've read, he'll continue to do it as long as he can. So I'm
that's good.
all the more for it. All right. Well,
Um,
go
one
ahead.
more point about Iron Man 2, just because
Yes.
I can't not talk about it. Can you imagine? It's so funny how things age. Can you imagine the absolute outrage if Elon Musk made a cameo in a
Oh
Marvel
my
film
God.
today? I
Oh,
just I almost lost it when I saw that. I'd completely
I had
forgotten
forgotten
that.
about it too. Like, and the funny thing is, the only reason why he really got that is there was a short amount of time where everybody in the world kind of respected Elon
Yeah.
and thought he was actually like our world's version of Tony Stark. They're like they actually
Oh
said that.
yeah. He had
I've
the
said
following that
that,
just like believed,
yeah,
yeah.
and I was completely misinformed. I'd completely take it back. I was wrong. So it's just like, no, like seeing that. Thankfully, it's such a small bit, but it's like when
Such
you,
a small bit.
but it's like when you watch movies nowadays too, and you see Trump in them, and you're just like, oh
I
God, like
Yeah,
no,
I
can
don't
we
remember what
erase
it
this
was. I
part?
saw one of his cameos the other day, and it's like, oh boy,
Yeah.
different era.
Yeah, so it's yeah, the Elon cameo feels very much in line with that same kind of, used to be kind of important-ish type of thing, and
Yeah.
it's kind of gone by the wayside at this point. Yeah, I could not imagine him popping up in a movie now.
That just I had to rewind. I had completely forgotten it, and I like part of me almost didn't believe it had happened, you know? It's like, no.
Yeah. Well, all right.
All
Well,
right.
that being said, I think we have beaten this movie to death.
I think so.
But why don't you let people know where they can find you?
You can find me on Twitter at cat_velour. You can check out my website, catvelour.com.
And make sure you go check out her book, Revenge Arc, which is
Yes,
coming in August.
it's coming up.
It is coming up soon. I actually, I did get a advanced reader copy, but I did also, because I'm terrible at actually reading physical books these days. I only read digitally. I did pre-order the book as well
Oh, yay.
through website. So yeah, I wanted to, because I do want to read it. I just didn't. I just realized, you know what, I'm never going to be able to read this like physically. It's cool. I like having it on my shelf. It's really nice, but at the same time, I'll have to wait till it comes out on digital, and then I will read it for sure. So,
Well,
so
thank you for pre-ordering. And I know exactly.
yeah,
I'm the reverse situation though,
yeah,
because like I'll sign up for like digital arcs all the time, and then it's like I can't read from a screen this much, it'll give me a headache, and then I end up buying the physical.
that's so funny. Yeah, no,
Just
I
like
would
stacks
love
and
to have.
stacks of books around my house.
Yeah, no, and then, like I was planning on doing that. I was gonna be like, okay, I'm just gonna buy books, all these books that people are doing and everything. And I was like, it's cool. I'm not super back into reading yet. Like I read comic
Mhm.
books, don't get me wrong, I read comic books all the time. But for some reason reading a normal book has just escaped me the last few years. And which seems to be a common theme for a lot of people. But I was just like, well, it'd be cool to have a shelf with all these. But then I was like, I'm never going to actually read these. I need to get the digital copies and just focus on doing only digital. So I'm actually kind of building a digital library of stuff, especially like small press horror and stuff. And, I got yours coming. I've got, I ordered Angel's livestock book, and
Oh,
I'm
nice.
I'm about midway through that. I haven't gotten to your story yet, but I've gotten a bunch of stuff, and I like helped kickstart what is it? Oh, I forget who that is. Um,
Oh, is it off limits?
no, it was
Okay.
the gosh, I'm completely blanking, and I feel bad. I'm gonna edit this. Um, Here is Screen Press. They
Oh, nice.
yeah, their crawling anthology campaign. So that plus, I guess it's like, what is it? The crawling anthology and several other books that they're going to be putting out later this year. So yeah, I got the ebooks for all that. So yeah, and just trying to like, one just to kind of help out small press type stuff, just because I feel like it's kind of interesting to see everybody coming out with all these new small presses and
Yeah.
independent books and everything, and I'm like all here for that, because I think it's better than having to go through all the other crap and and getting
Yeah.
denied all the time. So it's better that these small presses are around. So I'm just trying to buy stuff here and there, especially like because on digital it's so much cheaper, so which
It
is nice,
is.
thankfully, for a lot of these it's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot easier for me to just throw it onto my tablet and read when I'm able to. So but yes, I'm very excited for your book, and because it definitely seems like something I'd be into. So
The book also, I just got a sneak peek at the full color for the art. We commissioned like I keep people keep being confused when I talk about this because they're like, is it a comic? And it's not, but we
yeah,
did
yeah,
commission 3 comic pages for it.
okay.
That I have come in. I've finally got to see the full color art and they're so
Ooh.
pretty. And
Oh,
then
well,
I
I
felt
can't
really
wait to see
bad for
that.
the ARC readers because it's like, we commissioned we
Yeah.
got our commission in after the arc and it's like, oh no, but the comic art.
Well, that's okay. I'm glad I ordered the digital copy
So
then,
yeah,
so
I'm
I
glad
can
you
see
have the digital copy so
that.
you can see our 3 whole comic pages that we got.
Hey, that's really cool. So, all right. Well, thanks again for coming on.
Yes, thank you for
I
having
will.
me.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks again to Kat for joining me. On next week's episodes, Hugh McStay joins me on Monday to talk about Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare, and Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And on Friday, Larry from the Your Move Creep podcast joins me to talk about Thor. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard, please consider giving the show 5 stars and a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, please share the podcast on social media to help spread the word. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. Music for the podcast composed by Jerry Smith. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more on TeePublic or by donating to the Ko-fi page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.